What's going on? It's the Polygon Don, and in this series I comb through my PS4 games library, cherry picking a handful of titles that have largely flown under the radar. Today we've got another 5 sneaky little hidden gems for you to get a taste of and potentially add to your own collections. So without further ado, let's crack on.
The alien invasion of Earth began so quietly we barely noticed. Early incidents were covered up by the world's governments. The Great War has been raging for decades, and mankind has all but lost.
An oldie but a goodie, Alienation from Housemarque is a gorgeously detailed isometric twin-stick shooter that comes with that signature Housemarque polish and attention to detail. Much like their previous and more recent releases, this very much has that arcade feel to it too, with bite-sized levels, easy to comprehend mechanics and addictive gameplay permeating throughout. And just like the arcade experiences of old, it also provides its fair share of challenge too. Set in a future where Earth is undergoing a hostile takeover from invading aliens, humanity's fate rests in the hands of 4 elite soldiers from UNX, a military group assembled to combat the threat posed by the aliens. The game features a single-player mode, a couch co-op mode, and an online multiplayer mode that allows up to 4 players to play at once. The single-player mode has you choosing one of 3 starting classes at the beginning of the game: Bio-Specialist, Saboteur, and Tank, with each class having its own distinct weapon, movement mechanics, and abilities. The Tank is able to create a shield in which players can hide behind, the Saboteur has the ability to become invisible, and the Bio-Specialist, which was my favourite, can heal other team members and leave poisonous trails in his wake. You'll be running and gunning your way through countless enemies, and it's incredibly satisfying carving your way through them with the multiple weapon types the game offers you. You find them in random drops along with upgrade cores and other types of loot, which gives exploration and successful combat encounters an extra little rush of endorphins. The essence of the gameplay is horde mode basically. You will have to fend off wave after wave of enemy attacks while defending bases, etc. Learning the patterns of the enemies you encounter whilst managing the cooldowns of your special abilities will see you through to the later and more difficult stages, but skill and determination will get you to the game's conclusion. Like I said prior, this game is difficult at times and certainly doesn't hold its punches, but the way it's designed and the fact that the gameplay is so addictive makes it a very compelling experience nonetheless. It's so easy to pick up and play, and pretty much every time I did, I had a fantastic time with it. It does seem really well balanced overall, and at least for me provided numerous sweaty encounters where I was like a millisecond away from a game over screen, only for a well-timed melee attack or dash to keep me in the action for a little longer and alive to fight another day. This is a digital PSN game, but it did get a physical release in Asia, which is where I picked up mine from, China I believe. The cover is in English, as is the game itself, so if you're strictly physical media only, this is an option. But whether you go down that road or just pick it up in the next PSN sale, it's well worth checking out.
The theatre of war is a stage of many arts. Blood paints the true picture in the art of war, and an eternal conflict has taken center stage. While the foolish Dracul feign nobility, invaders from lesser bloodlines devastate the land. And the true enemy hides behind a veil of mold and rot. Tell me, what is the point of victory?
Immortal Realms Vampire Wars is a turn-based strategy game set in a dark and gothic vampire world currently embroiled in turmoil and infighting. As well as its turn-based strategic combat system, it includes unique card game and deck building elements, and a fun light management sim where you'll need to conquer land to grow your vampiric empire. There are 3 unique factions to choose from that differ quite drastically in both gameplay mechanics and story narrative. There's the Dracul that have a more structured, militaristic approach to the battlefield, the occult Nosfernus making use of necromancy and demonic pacts, and finally the Moroya, high arcane vampires that are experienced magic users. The units that each faction has at their employ are really unique from each other and offer up a varied selection of skills. Depending on where you recruit will determine what type of unit is available. Recruiting from a cave that has recently been brought under your faction's banner will grant you a swarm of bats, for example, while recruiting from a keep will net you some spearmen and archers. There's a lot to choose from, depending on who you will be up against or how you want your army to behave, and with each faction having their own unique unit types, there's a surprising amount of depth on offer here and a ton of replayability. Once you've selected a faction, you'll move through a world map laying claim to lands that aren't yours, recruit units to grow your army, feed, heal and attack, etc., all using a finite number of action points to do so. In addition to the action points allotted to you, there are cards that can be used during your turn that are a mix of generic and faction specific. Spending them or saving them for more tougher encounters to come will be a difficult decision that you'll frequently need to make. There are mainline enemies to engage with on the battlefield, but there are also optional and a lot of the time more difficult enemies to fight that usually offer up better rewards if you're brave and strong enough to take them on. Combat itself is your classic isometric grid-based tactical warfare that, while seeming simplistic at first, does require you to appoint a more strategic way of thinking as the campaign progresses, making you take into account the positioning of enemy and friendly units, their respective abilities and their ranks, with the wildcards being the lords themselves, the leaders of the pack, and are always the strongest unit at your disposal. They also include devastating special abilities, usually involving magic of some sort. The Dracul Lords, for example, utilise blood magic that can drain the blood of their victims, killing them and healing themselves in return. With skill trees and upgrade paths, there's a fairly sizable slice of RPG love on offer too. There's loot to find and equip, keywords that enhance your Lord's abilities, and cards that either buff your army or debuff theirs. Like I said, what seems simple at first actually gets quite deep when you get down to it. Then there's the empire building aspect. Secondary to the combat and RPG elements, it is slimmer in scope and complexity, but is a valued addition and a nice distraction from the game's core mechanics and gameplay loop. It's not a fantastic game, there are some niggles that I had when playing it. The AI, for example, isn't the sharpest tool in the box. The enemies are easily outmaneuvered and very predictable, so after a while it just sort of comes down to whose sword is bigger or who has the more units on the field. Also, I felt like the battle maps you fight on could have had more variety in terms of gameplay modifiers. Usually in these types of games there'll be sand or tall grass that restrict a unit's movement or conceal them from the enemy's line of sight, for example. But aside from the odd fence or boulder to stand behind, there isn't much else on offer here. What is nice, however, is that there's these sort of fountains or magical monuments dotted around that, while standing on their respective tiles, can grant buffs or enhance fighting abilities. Getting there before the enemy does is the challenge. It's not a 10 out of 10, but if you're into your turn-based or strategy games and wanted another to add to the collection, this would make a fine choice in my opinion. A little thin in story from what I usually expect with these games, but the core gameplay loop was addictive and the added elements of empire building and card collecting made it even more engaging and helps it stand out from the crowd.
For the bloodline! Lord, we obey.
Servants of Dracul!
colourful 2D platformer Marsupilami Hoobadventure is exactly the kind of game I want to play in these cold winter months for some reason. I'm not sure if it's the bright colours that make me forget about how grim and miserable it is outside, or if it harkens back and reminds me of a simpler time in gaming, when platformers still ruled the roost. Not entirely sure, but this is a brilliant little platformer nonetheless, and if it wasn't for channel viewer Alan C bringing it to my attention a few videos back, I probably never would have got my hands on it. So nice one, Alan, for suggesting it. Based on a random and fairly obscure 90s cartoon, and one that I genuinely used to love by the way, but haven't even thought of since the 90s, a Marsupilami game coming out almost 30 years after it was popularised and dare I say relevant, has kind of blown my mind to be honest. Maybe the cartoon is still huge in other countries and this totally makes sense, but I was quite shocked that this IP was used at all to be honest. Essentially, it's a side-scrolling 2D platformer as you guide one of 3 playable protagonists, Punch, Twister and Hope. Chilling out and living their best life on the island of Colombia, the trio open a cursed sarcophagus that has washed ashore and inadvertently release a mysterious ghost that puts a terrible curse on all the animals living on the island. Fortunately, our 3 little spotted companions are immune and it's down to them to chase down this spectre and ward off the spell. There's around 26 levels over a course of 3 world maps to explore and they are varied and exciting. You'll run, roll, jump and stomp your way through them as you precisely navigate your way to each level's boss. There are optional things to get sidetracked with too, such as bonus levels and, if you look closely, a whole new world map featuring 10 completely new prehistoric themed levels called the Hidden World. There's the obligatory time trial modes that unlock as you beat each level, and for those wanting more challenge there's also a hardcore mode, meaning there's a fairly decent amount of content available to provide you with hours of fun. A gaming genre that's been around pretty much since the dawn of gaming itself, there's obviously a lot of competition out there. Is this S tier? No, not really, but if this is a genre you're into, you should definitely give it a shot if you haven't already. It's bright, beautiful and genuinely feels lovingly made, from the gorgeous animations and background artwork to the brilliant music that accompanies you on your journey. It all culminates into a very competent example of what a family-friendly 2D platformer should be in my opinion. But apart from Alan C bringing it to my attention, I haven't heard another soul mention this game, which is crazy considering how much fun it is. If you're looking to add another colourful and non-offensive platformer to your collection, then you could do a lot worse than Marsupilami. I personally loved every minute of it. Hard to know where to begin with the next one. The Centennial case, a Shijima story, is unlike any of the games on this list, primarily down to the fact that it's an FMV game. And just in case there's anyone watching this that's unfamiliar, FMV stands for full motion video. So the majority of this game is just watching real world actors playing characters in an intriguing plot that I must say is beautifully shot and directed. The game aspect comes into effect as you play a detective of sorts, trying to piece together clues you've gathered in order to eventually arrive at a hypothesis to the game's many mysteries. A decent FMV game is hard to come by, partly due to the fact that they're rarely all that lucrative, so developers and publishers alike tend to take a lot less risks with them these days, if not ignore them completely. Gone is the 90s heyday of Phantasmagoria and Night Trap, etc., when the genre was most prolific. This niche little corner of gaming has had a rather large fall from grace since then, as more traditional design techniques and technology has dramatically improved over time. Basically, the point I'm trying to make is that this is a once every 10 years type of game, not just because it uses FMV, but because it uses FMV brilliantly. I won't be going too deep into any plot points, as its many mysteries should remain as such until you get a chance to experience them for yourselves. But essentially it's a murder mystery adventure where, over the span of a century, you as the player will follow a chain of murders that have plagued the Shijima family, a prominent and wealthy family that might or might not be cursed. 4 murders in total have occurred during 3 different time periods: 1922, 1972 and 2022. Playing as a mystery novelist turned impromptu detective, it will be your job to solve this century-old dilemma. Playing a lot like a J-drama, it's brilliantly acted and written and is comprised of around 6 chapters, I believe. Within those chapters, the gameplay is segmented into 3 distinct areas. The incident phase, which is where you can almost put the controller down. There's not much to interact with here. The main aim is to pay very close attention to what is being shown to you and formulate your own preliminary hypothesis as you watch the murder unfold. Then there's the reasoning phase. Here you arrange clues and organise evidence in a kind of mind palace that will allow you to reach multiple conclusions and hypotheses. Not all of them will be correct, however, so you really do need to always pay attention to what is presented to you during the previous incident phase. And finally, there's the solution phase. Here all your detective sleuthing pays off as you present your findings to those around you and hopefully find the true culprit. Some of the trickier encounters will have suspects refute your claims, so you'll need to strike back and present your reasoning, creating these really tense moments. It's all fairly simplistic, but the fact that you can arrive at multiple conclusions that all seem to make sense to some degree means you actually have to do some real detective work so that you arrive at the true hypothesis. The brilliance is that everything you need to come to the right conclusion is there in front of you during the incident phase. I learned that if something feels even slightly off, no matter how inconsequential at the time, like a strange look one of the characters gives another for example, there's probably a reason for that and should definitely be noted down. It's not a short experience either, with the FMV footage taking up around 10 to 12 hours, plus all the time it takes you to gather your clues and piece together your conclusion. You're basically playing through an entire season of a TV show. And just like any great TV show out there, regardless of genre, you have each episode strong enough to stand on its own and be entertaining in its own right, but there's also an overarching plot that ties it all together at the end. It's just brilliant. Whether you're a fan of FMV games or have never played one, I cannot recommend this enough. Gripping from start to finish, I genuinely couldn't put this down. Equally, if you like games like Ace Attorney or even Danganronpa, then I think you'll find great value here. This type of game is never going to sell gangbusters, but the reason it's so good is because the team behind it clearly has a passion for these games and it shows. I'm just grateful Square Enix took the gamble on publishing it. I'm pretty sure this was only released physically in the Asian market. I picked up my copy from Japan, but I've also regularly seen it in a PSN sale for less than half of what I paid, so there's that option too. Either way, check this game out when you get the chance.
Now なら100いや 120% の力を出せるよく避けた次はこちらの番だ
Dusk Diver is a third-person action-adventure RPG set in Taipei, which I think is the first video game I've ever played utilising this beautiful geographic location as its setting. It follows a young girl named Yumo as she hangs out with a friend in the shopping districts of Jimending when they are suddenly transported into a darker and more twisted version of the city, complete with unfamiliar creatures called Chaos Beasts and a heavily foreboding atmosphere. Being in the wrong place at the wrong time and massively underprepared, Yumo and her friend find themselves in a spot of bother. Thankfully, a guardian god named Leo happens to be in the vicinity and heals Yumo, but in doing so transfers most of his powers to her. Now revived and endowed with godlike abilities and a killer new hairstyle, Yumo gets revenge on the beast dwelling in this alternate dimension. Once dealt with, Yumo and her friend are safely returned to the real world and are introduced to the fact that these two parallel worlds exist simultaneously, and that is Leo's job along with some other colourful characters, like a portly porcelain bear named Boss, to keep the two worlds separate. There's nothing really new to see here in terms of story, it does just enough to keep things ticking along nicely, but this little slice of Taiwan to wander around in and the slicker than slick combat are the real stars of the show. The game is split into 2 modes essentially. There's the combat sections in the twisted alternative Jimending, and then there's the exploration and social sections of the game that take place in real-world Jimending. There's a lot to see and do in this compact little action RPG to keep you busy. Side quests are dotted around the map and can be completed as and when you please, with some boasting some genuinely funny encounters and valuable rewards, while others do unfortunately fall into fetch quest territory. There's also opportunities to enhance your connection with your party members through bonding events, and street food plays a big part in the game also. There's quite a large selection of vendors selling a variety of tasty treats for Yuma and her party to enjoy, each adding unique buffs to members. There's gotcha machines that can unlock concept art from the game and costumes for the characters to wear, as well as valuable potions for Yumo to take into battle. Pretty much all of the exploration side of this game feels like it borrows a lot from Persona 4 and 5. While it doesn't hit those highs, not many do, it does manage to evoke that same feeling of coziness. Like any good JRPG, there's lots of optional busy work, but it all feeds into character development in some form or another, and Dusk Diver is no different. The loop between the two game modes was very addictive and satisfying throughout, in my opinion. But gameplay was what surprised me the most, however. What starts off as very simplistic and button mashy develops and refines itself more as you level up your party and as the difficulty increases through game progression. You start off with light and heavy attacks, but are soon able to summon party members into battle, briefly allowing them to flex their own particular movesets. As the game progresses, you meet new characters that join your calls, each equipped with their own unique combat techniques and can be called upon and switched between on the fly during battle. Combat feels a little like a homage to Platinum games in a way. On a few occasions whilst fighting, it felt like I was playing a slightly watered down version of Bayonetta, for example. It might not be as deep a system, but it definitely has that same sort of kinetic speed, and I really enjoyed it. There are clear signs that you are playing a more budget RPG though, from the occasional texture pop-ins or the fact that everyone who inhabits this world, bar the main characters, are pastel shaded outlines until you draw near to them where more detail suddenly appears, and even then their faces are still blank. Even the menu system suffers, to be honest, with no audible feedback from selecting things. Navigating your way through can feel a little stuttered and cumbersome. But then this ambitious little game was made by a very small team, and the few negatives I found with it weren't enough to detract me from having a blast with it overall. If you're into your action games or JRPGs and haven't given this a go yet, then I highly recommend it. It will take you around 10 hours to complete and around 20 to platinum, so it really doesn't outstay its welcome and is well worth the time. Well, there you have it guys, another 5 hidden gems for you to consider adding to your collections. Would love to know what you guys think if you've played any of them already, so be sure to let me know down in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then have a think about hitting the like button as it genuinely helps out quite a bit, and subscribe if you're new to the channel and like all things PlayStation. Next video will probably be some long awaited PS5 content, so keep an eye out for that if you're interested. But that will do it for this one though guys, so thank you for watching, and as always, take care, be good, and game on.